Gilmour Space Technologies has completed the maiden test launch of Australia's first locally designed and built orbital rocket, and while it didn't make it very far, it did achieve several mission targets. Professor Andrew Dempster is Director of the Australian Centre for Space Engineering Research at the University of New South Wales. He's beaming in to take us on a deep dive. Professor, welcome. Gilmour Space has flown, albeit briefly. This is still great news, though.
Yeah, exactly. The rocket did make it past the gantry in the launch that it performed. To get that far, a lot of systems had to work. Communications had to work, and all of the rocket ignition and so on. So there was a lot of success there. But in order for you to get that rocket into space, it has to be 100%. It wasn't 100%, but there was a lot to learn there, and you learn a lot more from your failures than your successes. So Gilmour are going away, ferreting through the telemetry data that they will have collected, and I'm sure they'll be in a much stronger position next time they go for a launch.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the space industry, especially launch providers and rocket manufacturers, have been a tough nut to crack as a production company. They don't want to sing from the rooftops until they've got a proven model up and running. But in America, it's a different story. SpaceX publishes blooper reels, for example. What lessons can we learn from the American market?
Yes, I mean, what you're saying is that perhaps in Australia we're a bit naive about space. People don't understand it in the same way that Americans might. One of the important things about launch as a part of the space ecosystem is that it's the bit that joins the Earth to space. It's the bit that people can see. You can't see a satellite with your naked eye very much, and you certainly can't see it doing its work, but you can see the rocket doing its work, lifting off and so on. So the average punter does connect with a launch in a way that they don't connect with a satellite. So particularly in these early days, we haven't had a space agency for 10 years yet, Australians need to be given that evidence of participation in the space industry. Now, we've been launching satellites for a while. Those satellites have been relatively, well, they've had mixed success, but there has been success there. I mean, I'm involved in the Waratah Seed satellite at the moment, which possibly could be argued to be the most successful rideshare satellite ever, because there's been 9 payloads on there and 7 of them have achieved their goals, and the other 2 worked to an extent. So, satellites are doing well. It's important, though, psychologically for the Australian people to see a launch, and that would really make us feel like we're participating in the space industry in a way that big space players do.
The bureaucratic red tape here in Australia is a hurdle at the moment as well. Successive governments could have been doing more to really ramp up our ability to have sovereign capabilities, not just in the launch sector, but across the space industry as a whole.
Yeah. Look, I mean, there's a number of points there. Now, just if you look at the regulation of launch is an incredibly, or potentially dangerous thing. You've got quite a large container of highly explosive fuel that you don't really want to dump on a nearby settlement. So it's extremely important that launch is regulated properly. Now, I know that Gilmour, for instance, have complained about their difficulties in getting through the regulatory process, and I think there are arguments on both sides here, because they want to go about doing their business. The government wants that large canister of fuel not to land on a nearby settlement. So there are arguments for being overly cautious, but if you're too overly cautious, you never get anything done. So the balance, we're getting to the balance. It was the first time Gilmour had launched, so I think they weren't fully prepared for what they needed to do regulation-wise, but then also the space agency, this was the first time they had to cope with a launch like that, so everyone was learning at once. So there were frustrations, and I think venting your frustrations is fine, but I think in the end, the fact that we did get a launch and we made the progress that we did is very important. On the wider issue of the way that space has been dealt with by successive Australian governments, it's in general been pretty disappointing. And that's a bipartisan thing. Virtually the first thing that John Howard did when he came to power was he shut down what at that time was called the Space Office. And then, which is, quite a negative attitude to space. We get the same sort of thing from the most recent Albanese government, whereas, New Zealand has a minister for space in Ed Husic. We had a minister against space, really. I mean, the hostility towards the space industry was really, I think it's one of the stupidest things I've seen from government, this idea that the space industry is some sort of Liberal Party conspiracy. I think it's really quite stupid, and the gutting of the space agency at a time when it was really doing good work is quite annoying, given that the space industry in Australia is probably one of the fastest growing new industries. I mean, it's not a new industry globally, but it's certainly the nature of the Australian space industry is quite new. We have a lot of startups and we have a lot of successful startups. The startups in the space industry proportionally are doing much better than startups in general, and they're doing better than startups elsewhere. So we should be celebrating that rather than behaving the way the current government is. Now we've got a new minister now. We'll see how that goes. But you look at the work that the space agency was doing under the previous government, it was really quite effective. A lot of the work they were doing was all of government work. There were roadmaps for certain technologies. Robotics and automation was one that I was involved in, and that got published, the roadmap. Another one that I was involved with was PNT, position, navigation and timing. And that roadmap was not published because the new government came in before it was ready. And they've done a lot more closing down of projects rather than opening up the sector to celebrate the success that those startups have had. So it's quite disappointing, and we're hoping that the new minister has a more sensible approach to this sort of growing industry.
You mentioned the current government seems to think that the space agency is a Liberal government conspiracy. What do you mean by that? And I guess that's sort of why they're being a bit hostile to the sector.
Yeah, look, it's probably not. There are a few things that I could tell you off camera. But I think there was some stuff that went on early on in the new government's tenure, which upset the government. I think they saw them as politically motivated where they probably weren't. And I think that's where the problem lies.
I think as a whole, though, we sort of need to push forward as this industry. We were sort of talking before about Kenyini being a sovereign state satellite, providing pretty critical data to the broader community as well. The farming sector and stuff like that. This sovereign capability that we need here in Australia. We've just got to find a way forward to get it done and start bringing stuff onshore. I know people on Trekzone's comments have been saying, yeah, but everyone else does it, why do we need to do it? The whole fact is that we need to stop relying on other countries and other people to do it. We can see it with America at the moment, the way things are sort of changing by the day. You wake up and something new has happened, some new tariff has been imposed or something like that. So we need to bring everything onshore and be doing Australian stuff by Australians.
Again, there's a number of points there. One is that the tariff thing does make your ability to operate in a global economy more difficult, but the space industry really is an international effort. I don't think we should be looking to do everything here. We should be looking to participate in those global supply chains and doing things well that we are good at. Now, 10 years ago, when we were lobbying for the space agency, I was out in public saying that yes, we could develop all these capabilities. And to some extent, that has happened. We do have launch providers, we have spaceports, we have satellite builders, we have payload providers, system integrators, and ground segment providers, all of whom probably say 10 or 15 years ago did not exist. And it's almost like an entire, or elements of the entire ecosystem have been developed here, which is really amazing. This is part of what I'm saying about the strength of the growth of this industry. So the argument for sovereignty is a mixed one. I mean, I think clearly you do want to insulate yourself to the behavior of the US, the way it's going at the moment. And there are other things that are related that may represent opportunities for us. For instance, those public institutions such as NASA are being defunded. Why would we not look at recruiting some of those experts, bringing them here in order to build our industry? Why don't we take a strategic approach to that sort of thing? So I think there's, the sovereignty argument is important, and I think sovereign capability is important, but so is being able to fit into global supply chains.
And we did see that a little bit there when the previous US administration and the issues that Russia was presenting to the world. We were still flying. We still had American astronauts flying on Soyuz, and Russia was still part of the International Space Station. So, I really do like that the space community is kind of insular from geopolitical elements and such forth. Obviously, to a certain degree, we're all still government agencies and such forth. But yes,
yeah. Look, I mean, the way that international cooperation worked, particularly on the space station, was and is possibly one of the few areas where you could say there's optimism. I mean, my own research is in satellite navigation, and the part of the spectrum where GPS lives is also shared with the Russian system GLONASS, the Chinese system BeiDou, the European system Galileo. And so all the time, people from those places need to get together and make sure that the right behavior is happening in that part of the spectrum, because spectrum is very precious. And so that's another area. I mean, people always talk about the space station as being the one. I can also point at the satellite navigation community as being good at cooperating, and that's largely through the through structures within the United Nations.
Well, bringing it back to the launch, where to from here for Gilmour Space?
I'm not going to speculate on what the problems were with that rocket. It's had its time. It's produced a lot of data. The timing of the next launch will relate to how they go about processing that data. So it's not a case of being able to say, right, okay, we're going to do another one in 6 months. We saw in the lead up to that launch how much it's affected by weather. So even predicting when you're ready doesn't mean that the world is ready to allow you to do it. But the timing from their point of view to when they are next ready will relate to how much work they have to do to avoid the problems that they had this time. So they have to make sure that they've got all the right data, process the data, be very clear about where the problems are, and then fix problems and let's go again.
Watch this space, I think, is the takeaway from all of this. Professor Dempster, thanks for your time, and thanks for beaming into this edition of Talkin' Science.
Great, thank you.
Daily science and space stories with an Aussie flair, plus a deep dive into the science or space headline of the week, and the occasional science fiction podcast. Like, follow, and subscribe for more. Membership available to help us do more. That's at the Trekzone/support. Back at the Kestrel Nest Eco Hut from next week. This is Trekzone's Talkin' Science.